Good morning and welcome to Chapter 5.1 on Simple Interest in Math 1324. Even if you don't like math, this chapter is probably the most important chapter of math that you will ever take because it all deals with money and all the aspects of money that each of us deal with, from credit cards to home loans to car loans to savings accounts to investments, etc. And so it's a very short chapter, but it's a very important one. And there's some fundamental things that you should really try to learn here. So pay close attention to this chapter. It can make a huge difference. It's my judgment, and I'm not BSing you, that if I knew these things, not just knew them, but adopted the knowledge and strategies that we're going to cover in the next 4 sections, that I would be probably at least $250,000 richer right now, if not more. And that all has to do with interest and loans, etc. So welcome to this lecture. That should set you up pretty good. And so our brief pause today is going to be about finances. You are the root of your financial success or failure. If you work on the roots, the fruits will take care of themselves. And, most of us complain about money, not having enough, not making enough, not having any money left over at the end of the month. But this is all based on our choices for the most part, if not for the entire part. And so learning about money and how it works is very, very important. I know that in my late 20s, early 30s, I was being coached by someone, and one of the things that they mentioned to me that they observed was when I spoke about money, I spoke about it as a separate thing that was happening to me, as if I had no control or power over it. And this was an eye-opening experience. It still took me a bit of time and energy and to change my habits, my spending habits, my saving habits that have made a difference in my life. So let's go a little bit more specific. Warren Buffett is, what did they call him? The sage from Omaha, one of the richest men in the world, and lives in the same home, drives the same car. And so he's been very financially savvy for a long time, especially on the spending side, but exceptionally on the investing side. And this is what Warren Buffett has to say. On earning, never depend on single income. Make investment to create a second source. And what he's talking about here is most of us think of our job as our income. And what he's saying is no matter what your income is, you should be putting aside a part of that and putting that into investments, the stock market, bonds, savings, etc. Probably not savings right now, but we'll talk about that later in this chapter. But you really need to start moving. It doesn't matter what you move, 5%, 10%, 20%, 40%, but you should be putting aside a part of your income into future income or investments. On spending, if you buy things you do not need, soon you will have to sell things you do need. Interesting. I know this has been a huge part of my learning curve, is about needs versus wants and managing my emotions around purchases. On savings, do not save what is left after spending, but spend what is left after saving. I've heard this, as long as I can remember, that saving should come first and then your expenses. But most of us spend our money and then we think we'll save whatever's left at the end of the month. And if you're anything like me, or anything like I was, and still have to be very conscious of, if I got it, I can spend it very easily. And so I have to be very conscious to put it away into savings, into investments, before I get the urge to spend it. On taking risk, never test the depth of river with both the feet. So you've decided you're going to invest money, but you certainly don't want to put your livelihood, your home, your car, etc. at risk by putting all your money into this sweet deal that you're sure is going to pay off. And that's what he's saying. Don't jump into the river all at once. On investment, do not put all eggs in one basket. There is no sure thing. The sure things can do well at sometimes and do poorly at others. So you want to diversify, have money spread around in different types of investments. Probably medium to low risk initially, and then once you've built some of an egg, maybe using parts of that, a small percentage of that, 10, 20, 30%, later on into more risky investments that could turn a greater return of investment. On expectations. Honesty is a very expensive gift. Do not expect it from cheap people. Okay? And so I think he's just saying be careful of what people tell you. Know who they are. Do your homework on the investment. I get emails all the time about the next sure thing, and it always caveats it with the person who's recommending this recommended buying Microsoft at 1 cent, and now you'd be a billionaire, etc., etc. So be careful. A big thing, it's not about having lots of money, it's knowing how to manage it. A corollary of this, it's not how much you make, but how much you save. A big part of this chapter as well, every time you borrow money, you're robbing your future self. When you borrow money, you are agreeing to pay that back at a higher amount because of interest. The highest amount of interest that you can borrow is using your credit card. When you use a credit card, you are not getting something for free, and you're not getting stuff that you only have to pay $25 or $30 a month for. You are paying a much higher premium over time. And this was the hardest lesson for me to learn, especially about credit cards. I had some kind of mental attitude that I deserve things because I work hard, and so I was going to buy them with my credit card, but the only person I was robbing was myself, because years later I had $10,000, $15,000 in credit card debt. If you are born poor, it's not your fault, but if you die poor, it is your fault. And this sounds a little bit harsh, but I think it's a wake-up call that managing your money is your responsibility. So learning how to do it, one of the most important aspects of all of our lives, because we want to, not be homeless and we want to have a good life, is about managing our money. And there are simple things to do and many strategies out there that can help you be successful and define yourself as not being poor anymore. And it's not that you have to have $1 million or 10 million or $1 billion to be rich. It's just that you don't live paycheck to paycheck. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. So these are some good quotes to hopefully start us off. And hopefully motivate you to see that this is a really, really important chapter, not for just this course, but really for your life. So we're going to talk about first what financial savvy means. Savvy is knowing how to do something. How good are you at managing your money? What do you think about that? I thought I was pretty good, I got a job right out of college that was a pretty good income at the time and was able to buy a car, so I thought I was doing well. What I didn't realize is that all the money I had developed a habit of spending on credit cards in college, I continued to do, and so was paying a premium, was losing money because I was robbing my future self. What are some things that someone who is financially smart would do? What do you think about that? Saving, investing, we've already talked about some of that. being mindful of spending. These are some things. Well, let's look at those. Americans are very confident in their financial expertise. 48% of Americans consider themselves financially savvy, that they know what they're doing. 45% know they should set aside 20% of their income for savings. This is a minimum, okay? I know that when you're starting out in your career in life, it's hard to get to 20%, but you've got to start somewhere, and you want to be at a minimum of 20% within the first couple years of working full-time. More than half of Americans know an emergency financial fund should hold 6 months of living expenses, okay? So this is your nest egg, this is your rainy day fund, and you should be building that to have 6 months of expenses. So if you lost your job for 6 months, you would be absolutely fine at your current level of spending. If you cut your spending than what you do when you normally have a job, then that will last even longer. I'm filming this during the pandemic with COVID-19, and so having this would have been a godsend for so many people, and businesses too. Businesses should also have a rainy day fund. And 25% of Americans are debt-free. Now, debt-free is defined as you own your car, you don't have any credit card debt, the only loan that you have is on your home. And so a home is considered an investment more than it is a debt, even though you have a home loan. And 46% agree that retirement savings should begin in a person's 20s. Now, mine did begin in my 20s, and only because when I started my job after college, every corporation had a pension plan, every corporation. Now it's more voluntary, called an IRA, an individual retirement account, okay? And these are usually matching accounts. And so normally when you go to a corporation full-time, they will offer you an IRA account, and they will match up to whatever you donate, usually up to 5 or 7%. Whatever that amount is, maximize it. Think about it, it's free money. If they match your income by 5% and you put 5% away each paycheck, that means you're automatically getting a 5% raise, because they are giving that money and putting it into your retirement account as well. So I worked for the first company for about 9 years, and then moved on to other work, and I forgot about that retirement account there. About 4 years ago, I got a letter from that retirement account asking me if I wanted to cash out my money from, this is now 30 years ago, and at that point, I could take a cash settlement, which was about $50,000, which sounded really nice, and it was really hard to turn that down. Or I could hold on till I was in my 60s to retire and be given anywhere from $500 to $1,000 a month. It was a hard decision, but in some ways it was a no-brainer, because I knew that that money would be much more valuable to me when I was not working and having a regular income. So I held the line and let them keep the money until I retire. While most Americans understand what some things are about being financially savvy, they aren't actually doing it. And so this is what I was starting at. It's not just about knowing this stuff. That's the first step, understanding what's going on, how money works, etc. The second part is actually doing something about it, actually following strategies that work for you, that are smart for you, that help you to grow into financial savvy, financial independence. 70% of Americans currently have some form of debt, and 30% of those in debt have no plan to pay it off. I have a sister-in-law like this. Her story that she keeps telling is she's a single mom and she had to use her credit cards to make ends meet. You know, I've often wanted to say to her, you know, your children are now in their 30s, so they haven't been at home for over a decade. So that story doesn't fly anymore. And if you haven't been able to pay off your bills in over a decade, you've got a problem with your spending. If your credit card bills you can't pay off in a decade, then your spending is the problem as much. 2/3 of respondents do not have 6 months of living expenses saved in an emergency fund. It's really key to have some money there. Your transmission goes out in your car, et cetera, et cetera. And people now think of their credit cards as their rainy day funds. Now, I understand that, and I had the same thought for a long time, but think about it. Most credit cards are at 20+% interest. So that means you're paying 20% more for that service than you would if you had the money saved in your cash fund. 30% of Americans don't have an emergency fund at all. If anything happens, they are in trouble, and we've seen that with the COVID pandemic. More than half of respondents don't contribute to a 401k. That's an investment account, a retirement investment account, an IRA, an individual retirement account, or other retirement plan. This is crazy. If you are working full-time, most companies, most organizations offer some kind of investment. If you are not, there are plenty of investment houses out there that can set you up an IRA or a 401k. I don't care if you're only putting $50 a paycheck or $100 a month. You should be putting something in there, because it's all about the time. The longer that money sits in there and earns interest, the more money you're going to have at retirement, and potentially the ability to retire even earlier. What's the good news? Financial independence is a goal of 82% of Americans. And this is simply defined as living debt-free, again, with the exception of a mortgage, which is a home loan, and no longer living paycheck to paycheck, okay? When I look back, this did not happen for me until I was in my late 30s, early 40s. And yet I know now when I look back, it could have happened as early as 22 when I got my first corporate job. My income more than doubled that year, and it would have been easy for me to put 20% away and to live on what I was living on before. And so, this is really about the story you tell yourself, and whether you're willing to be honest with yourself and also take the steps that are necessary to get what you really want in the long term. Be careful. Everything that we are shown by banks, by loan companies, by consumer products, car companies, HGTV, etc., is telling us to spend, 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 spend. So it's only up to you to figure out, how do you deal with the emotional aspect of all these messages telling you to spend? How do you go look at a new car and realize that your car has plenty of life left in it, and you'd rather have that money in your bank account than be riding around in a nicer car? And that's a tough one. That's one of the big ones. So I believe this is so important that I've created an assignment that will be 25% of your test grade for Chapter 5, okay? It's called Your Money or Your Life. This is the title of a book that this is partially based on. It's a great book about about financial savvy and financial independence, and about making smart choices, okay? What you're seeing here is the first page of it. I want you, as you're doing section 5.1, to do part 1 of Your Money or Your Life. So read through these. This is what we just looked at. Part 1 at the bottom of page 1 here has some links on it that go into a tutorial about how to use your TI-84 or TI-83 calculator to do financial transactions. I am telling you right now, this is the most important tutorial for your grade in this class, and then for the value of that calculator. You will no longer need to rely on the guy that's selling you the car to figure out if this is a good loan deal or not. You'll be able to figure out how much money you want to spend based upon your payment per month, if that's what you're going to choose to do, or how much car you can get, or what the payments would be for a certain amount, okay? So I want you to go through this, read page 1, slow down here. It takes maybe about an hour to do this tutorial at the bottom of page 1. And then page 1 continues with just a short reading about the goals of banks and putting that in perspective, realizing that banks are not on your side. Banks are there to make money just like any other business. And so they make money when they get interest from you, when you use their credit card, when you get a loan from them, etc. So you have to be your own advocate. Your banker is not your financial advocate, okay? And then there's a quick question here. A lot of the questions in this take-home portion are about you. I'm trying to get you to reflect on where you are right now, what's important to you, and where do you see your own pitfalls. And so like this first question said, what is one good strategy for you to use to not get swept away by emotion on a big purchase? Okay. Again, be careful. Everything out there is telling us in America to spend, 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 spend. And you want to be careful of that. Okay. It's very easy to get caught up watching HGTV and I have to have a new refrigerator. Well, maybe my refrigerator has another decade of life in it. Do I really need a new refrigerator because it's in the latest color? All right, enough commercial there. We'll get more of it as we go along. But again, what I want you to do with section 5.1, we're going to have different sections to complete with each chapter section. I want you to read the first section, complete the calcs tutorials, TVM calcs, time value of money is what that stands for. I'll read about banks and credit, and then answer this first question in the middle of page 2. Okay, and then we'll move on to part 2, etc. If you're in my online class, you can find this take-home assignment in your eCampus course shell, and it's, I believe, in the link for MyLab Math. All right, so let's get on with our lecture. Simple interest. Interest is the fee paid to use someone else's money. Interest on loans of a year or less is frequently calculated as simple interest, which is paid only on the amount borrowed or invested and not on past interest. The amount borrowed or deposited is called the principal. So if you borrow $20,000 to buy a car, the principal is $20,000. If you put $1,000 into a savings account, the principal is $1,000. The amount borrowed or deposited is called the principal. The rate of interest is given as a percent per year and should be expressed as a decimal when we're doing the mathematics. For example, 6% equals 0.06. Percent, by the way, is a French term meaning per 100. And so this is 6 100ths, or 0.06. And 11.5% is 0.115, okay? 0.115. Be careful there. Oftentimes I'll see 6% is 0.6. No, that would be 60%. So know that you move the decimal places 2 places to the left. And the time during which money is accruing interest is calculated in years. This is really, really important that you understand that the interest rate is per years. So when any other time unit is given in a problem, you have to calculate it or translate it into years. For example, if it says how much interest will you pay in 3 months? Well, 3 months is 3 out of 12 months, or 1/4 of a year. If it said how much interest is calculated in 42 days, well, there are 365 days in a year, so you would calculate the time would be 42 divided by 365. And we'll see that in problems as we go through. But this is a really important thing to take notice of. Simple interest is calculated as the product of the principal, the rate, and the time. The simple interest I on P dollars at a rate of interest R per year for 10 years, or for T years, is I equals P RT. Interest equals principal times rate times time. So let's look at a simple example here. To furnish her new apartment, Maggie Chan borrowed $4,000 at 3% interest from her parents for 9 months. How much interest will she pay? Okay, well, the interest is the principal. Remember the amount you borrow or deposit, so that's $4,000. The rate is 3%, so that's 0.03. And the time is 9 months. Now remember we said this is about years, so we have to convert the time into years. Since there's 12 months in a year, the time will equal 9 out of 12. 9 over 12 is a fraction, okay? So we get 4,000 times 0.03, 9 over 12 reduces to 3/4. And so Maggie will pay $90 in interest back to her parents for borrowing that money for 9 months. So go ahead and pause the video right now and see if you can make these calculations correctly. Shouldn't take you long. It's a simple formula. Again, we have it right here and we have them all valued there. So hit the pause, try these and see if you can do them with your calculator pretty quick. So for number 2, $35,000 at 6% interest for 9 months. Again, notice we changed the percent to a decimal. And we change the time period into years by simply dividing by how many units are in a year. And there are 12 months in a year. So the answer to number 2 is 1,575. For number 4, we get 1,875 times 0.053. Notice it's 5.3 interest, so it's 0.053 times for 7 months, so 7 divided by 12. We get 57.968675. Do not leave your answer like this. Remember, we're dealing with money. Money is in dollars and cents. You need to round to 2 decimal places for money. And the last one, 5160 at 7.1% for 58 days. The interest would equal 5160 times 0.071 times 58 divided by the number of days in a year, or 365. And again, I have to round, and so I get $58.22. Simple interest is normally used only for loans with a term of a year or less. A significant exception is the case of corporate bonds and similar financial instruments. A typical bond pays simple interest twice a year for a specified length of time, at the end of which the bond matures. At maturity, the company returns your initial investment to you. Okay, so if I had a 10-year corporate bond, then I would get 20 payments in that 10 years based upon the interest rate. Every 6 months, twice a year, every 6 months, I would get a check based upon that investment and some agreed upon interest rate. And then at the end, I would get my initial investment. Okay. On January 8th, Bank of America issued a 10-year bonds at an annual simple interest rate of 3.3% with interest paid twice a year. John Altier buys a $10,000 bond. How much interest will he earn every 6 months? So this is just a simple interest question. Remember, interest is principal times rate times time. Principal times rate times time. So this is very easy to calculate. 10,000 times 0.033 times 1/2. Why 1/2? 6 months is half a year. And so every 6 months, John is going to get a check for $165. How much interest will he earn over the 10-year life of the bond? Well, notice here he's getting this every 6 months. So all I have to do is times it by 2 to figure out how much interest he gets in a year, and then times that by 10 to figure out how much he will get in 10 years. Okay? Another way I can do this is just by going back to the formula I know. John is getting, his investment or principal is 10,000. The interest rate hasn't changed. And so instead of figuring out what he gets by 6 and then multiplying, we can just figure out what he's going to get in 10 years. And so over 10 years, he's going to make $3,300. And this is what I was saying. You could also do the same thing by taking the interest rate he gets every 6 months times 20, because he gets 2 payments a year for 10 years. For each of the given corporate bonds whose interest rates are provided, find the semi-annual interest payment and the total interest earned over the life of the bond. So we have this is the same question really, a $5,000 IBM bond for 3 years at 1.25%. So we're going to get a check of $31.25 every 6 months. And again, we can do this either by doing the interest calculation or by using the 6-month payment and multiplying by the number of payments there will be. Since it's 3 years and 2 payments a year, that'll be 6 payments. And you can see that both of these add up to $187.50 in interest over that 3-year time. If you deposit, this is future value or the maturity value. Both of those mean the same thing. If you deposit P dollars, remember P is principal, at simple interest rate R for T years, then the future value or the maturity value, when your money has grown up, that's why it's called maturity, money grows over time, and that happens whether you're borrowing it, which means you owe more over time, or you're investing it, which means you earn more over time. When then the future value or maturity value, denoted by the letter A, capital A, of this investment is the sum of the principal and the interest it has earned. So that makes sense. So, if I put $1,000 of principal into a savings account, I'm going to earn some interest. Well, the money I have in my account in the future value or the maturity value, is going to equal what I put in originally, the principal, plus all the interest I earned. Well, remember that principal is P and interest is I, but also remember that interest can be calculated as a product of principal times rate times time. And so I can see here that I can figure out my future value without actually having to go through and calculate what interest I'm going to get in a period. And so we have a new formula that's kind of built on the old one, that principal times 1 plus RT, rate times time, in parentheses, will give us the future value, or what the amount of money will be in my account, or the amount of money that I will have paid back to a lender for a loan. The future value, maturity value, A of P dollars for 2 years at interest rate R per year is calculated as A equals P plus I, principal plus interest, or A equals P times the quantity of 1 plus RT, which is rate times time. Let's look at another example. Find each maturity value and the amount of interest paid. Rick borrows $20,000 from his parents at 5.25% to add a room on his house. He plans to repay the loan in 9 months with the bonus he expects to receive at that time. So if we use just the future amount equals principal times 1 plus rate times time, we get $20,000, the amount he borrowed from his parents, 1 plus the interest rate, 5.25, as a decimal, 0.0525, times 9 months. Well, 9 months is 9 out of 12, which is 3/4 or 0.75. This is approximately equal to $20,787.50. So the second part of the question asks, find the amount of interest he paid. Well, if he borrowed $20,000 and at the end he's paying back $20,787.50, how much interest did he pay? What's the difference? Well, it's $787.50. He borrowed $20,000, he paid back $20,787, And so the interest he paid to borrow to use that money was $787.50. Whenever you borrow money, you are putting a lien on your future earnings because you're going to have to pay more. Here he paid nearly $1,000 more to put that addition on his house or home improvement. Think about it. In 9 months, why not wait the 9 months if you know you're going to have the money and do it then? Okay. Now you have an extra almost $800 to spend on something in that room or whatever he was doing. Maybe furniture, maybe, upgrade the utilities or the insulation. So in this example, if he had waited 9 months, he would have saved $800 and could have done something with that. Let's look at another one. The present value. A sum of money that can be deposited today to yield some larger amount in the future is called the present value of that future amount. Present value refers to the principal to be invested or loaned, so we use the same variable P as we did for principal. In interest problems, P always represents the amount at the beginning of the period, and A always represents the amount at the end of the period. So present value is where you start at, whether it's the money you borrow or the money you invest on the front end, and A is the future value, the money you get at the end. Okay, and using that same formula, we're just calculating the present value if we're given the future value and an interest rate and time. So the present value, the original amount, is equal to the future value divided by 1 plus RT. Let's look at one quick example, and then we'll be done for the day. Because of a court settlement, Jeff Widener owes $5,000 to Chuck Sinovec. The money must be paid in 10 months with no interest. Suppose Widener wants to pay the money today and that Sinovec can invest it at an annual rate of 5%. What amount would Sinovec be willing to accept to settle the debt? So this is where it gets complicated, okay? So he's got to pay this money back in 10 months with no interest. So he owes $5,000 in 10 months' time, okay? But he wants to pay the money today, and since Sinovec can invest it, they will be willing to take less than this because they are going to earn that 5% over the next 10 months. So what we're trying to do is figure out what money can he pay today, the present value that will make $5,000 in 10 months based upon 5% interest. Okay? The 5,000 is the future value in 10 months. So Sinovec should be willing to accept an amount that will grow to 5,000 in 10 months at 5% interest. In other words, he should accept the present value of 5,000. So using that formula, we simply have the future value divided by 1 plus R, the rate was 5%, times time, which is 10 divided by 12, or 5 over 6 reduced. And so he should be able to pay them $4,800 today to satisfy his debt. This should give you enough to get started in 5.1. Start that tutorial, or not the take-home part of the test, part 1, and we'll see you back for a lecture on 5.2.